How America lost the war of legitimacy, and Iran won the world's sympathy. For decades, Washington sold itself as the guardian of order, law, and civilization. Iran, meanwhile, was cast as the permanent villain, the rogue state, the destabilizer, the threat. But history has a brutal habit of humiliating empire. In this latest confrontation, the United States may still possess unmatched military hardware, vast air power, and a global alliance system. Yet it is losing something even more important, moral legitimacy. And in war, once legitimacy collapses, the political battle is already half lost. Recent reporting shows that the conflict has escalated sharply, with U.S. operations intensifying, Iranian retaliation expanding across the region, and the human and economic costs mounting fast. This is the central truth Washington does not want to confront. Brute force is not the same as victory. Bombs can destroy airfields, ports, and infrastructure. They cannot command admiration. Carrier groups can intimidate smaller states. They cannot erase the image of a superpower, once again setting the region on fire while preaching stability. Even inside the United States, public support is weak. A Reuters Ipsos poll published on March 31st found that 66% of Americans want the U.S. to end its involvement quickly even if its stated objectives are not achieved, while 60% disapproved of U.S. military strikes on Iran. That matters enormously. An empire begins to lose when its own citizens no longer believe the sacrifice is worth it. The White House may speak in the language of deterrence, security, and strategic necessity, but ordinary people see something else. More death, more instability, more inflation, more gasoline shocks, and yet another war with no clear political end state. Reuters also reported Federal Reserve concern that the war is worsening inflation risks through higher fuel and commodity costs. Iran's advantage, then, is not that it is militarily stronger than the United States. It is not. Iran's advantage is that it has managed, in the eyes of many across the world, to occupy the role of the punished rather than the punisher, the besieged rather than the besieger, the nation absorbing blows from a coalition that claims moral superiority while producing mass destruction. That is how sympathy is won in modern geopolitics, not by perfection but by contrast. When a stronger power looks arrogant, relentless, and indifferent to civilian suffering, the weaker side gains emotional and political ground simply by enduring. This does not mean Iran is innocent. It does not mean Tehran is some saintly force above criticism. Reuters has reported that Iran spent years building networks of armed allies across the region, even if some of those proxies have lately shown reluctance to fully join the war. But global opinion is rarely shaped by nuance alone. It is shaped by spectacle, hierarchy, and hypocrisy. And the spectacle the world sees today is not America defending order. It is America, once again, deep in a catastrophic Middle Eastern war, demanding that others accept its narrative while bodies pile up and markets shake. AP reports that oil prices have surged above $107 a barrel in this conflict, and U.S. gasoline has risen above $4 per gallon, underscoring the widening fallout. There is another humiliation here for Washington. Even some allies appear less enthusiastic than expected. AP reported that President Trump publicly lashed out at allies over the burden of securing the Strait of Hormuz, while some European states have reportedly refused full operational support. That is not the image of confident leadership. It is the image of strategic overreach. The superpower that starts the fire and then complains others are not carrying enough water. Meanwhile, even among states that oppose Iran, there is visible nervousness about what an American-driven escalation might unleash. AP has reported diverging positions among Gulf governments, with some pressing for harder action while others still prefer diplomacy. Reuters, for its part, shows that regional diplomacy is rapidly shifting, with Pakistan emerging as a mediator in efforts around the Iran conflict. That alone reveals the limits of U.S. dominance. If Washington were truly commanding events, others would be following its lead, not scrambling to contain the damage. So how did America lose? It lost by believing that power can substitute for principle. It lost by assuming that the world still automatically accepts its distinction between our violence and their violence. It lost by failing to understand that the post-Iraq, post-Afghanistan, post-Gaza global public is far less willing to swallow old imperial scripts. In much of the world, especially across the global south, the United States is no longer seen as the reluctant policeman. It is increasingly viewed as a selective enforcer of international law, harsh against enemies, indulgent toward allies, and far too comfortable with civilian devastation when it serves geopolitical ends. That broader credibility crisis did not begin with this war, but this war has exposed it brutally. And this is where Iran has won hearts, at least relative to Washington. Not because the Iranian state is universally admired, not because millions suddenly embrace its ideology, but because in a contest of images, narratives, and perceived injustice, America has once again made itself look like the giant that cannot stop punching. When the stronger actor appears insatiable, the weaker actor inherits the language of dignity, resistance, and survival. That language travels far. It resonates in streets, on campuses, across social media, and throughout societies long exhausted by Western double standards. The American establishment will reject this analysis, of course. It will insist that military success is measurable in destroyed targets, degraded capabilities, and coercive leverage. Reuters reported that Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the United States could achieve its objectives without ground troops and expected the operation to conclude within weeks. But the graveyard of American foreign policy is filled with operations that look tactically impressive and strategically hollow. The problem is not whether Washington can hit Iran hard. It obviously can. The problem is whether those strikes produce anything resembling a durable political outcome rather than deeper regional rage, higher global costs, and a wider crisis of legitimacy. The evidence so far points in the wrong direction. In the end, this is the bitter paradox of empire. The more violently it tries to prove control, the more clearly it reveals its political weakness. America can still devastate, but it can no longer easily persuade. Iran can still be isolated in many formal institutions. But in the court of global emotion, outrage, and anti-imperial memory, it has found an opening. Washington may win sorties and headlines for a day. Yet if the world comes away seeing the United States as the author of chaos and Iran as the battered symbol of defiance, then America has already lost the larger war that matters most. Because in the 21st century, dominance without legitimacy is not victory. It is exposure.